Captain Sarah Mitchell gripped the control stick of her A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft as she soared through the crystal-clear morning sky above the rugged mountains of Afghanistan. The twin engines of the legendary Warthog hummed steadily beneath her, a comforting sound that had become like a heartbeat during her 3 years of combat missions. At 28 years old, Sarah had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled close air support pilots in the entire Air Force. But today felt different somehow. The radio crackled in her helmet as her squadron leader's voice cut through the static. Viper 1, this is Command. We have an urgent situation. Developing in Sector 7. Multiple SEAL teams are requesting immediate air support. Sarah's pulse quickened as she adjusted her, heading toward the coordinates being transmitted to her navigation system. She had worked with Navy SEALs before, but something in the commander's voice suggested this wasn't a routine mission. Below her, the landscape stretched out like a patchwork quilt of brown and green, with deep valleys carved between towering peaks that seemed to touch the clouds. Sarah had grown up in Montana, where mountains were a part of daily life. But the Afghan terrain still took her breath away with its harsh beauty and deadly secrets hidden in every shadow. Command, this is Viper 1. I'm 15 minutes out from Sector 7. Can you give me a situation report? Sarah spoke into her microphone while running through her pre-combat checklist with practiced efficiency. Her gloved hands moved across the instrument panel, checking weapon systems and ensuring her 30mm GAU-8 cannon was ready for action. The response that came through her headset made her blood run cold. Viper 1. We have 381 SEALs trapped in a box canyon approximately 12 clicks north of Fob Patterson. Intelligence indicates they walked into a well-planned ambush. Enemy forces have the high ground and superior numbers. The SEALs are taking heavy casualties and running low on ammunition. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. 381 SEALs represented nearly every special operations soldier currently deployed in the region. Someone had leaked their mission parameters, and now America's elite warriors were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds in terrain that gave every advantage to their enemies. What's their extraction timeline, Command? Sarah asked while pushing her aircraft to maximum speed. The familiar vibration of the A-10's engines increasing as she demanded more power from the twin turbofans. Negative on extraction, Viper 1. All helicopter assets are grounded due to surface-to-air missile threats in that sector. The SEALs are on their own until we can clear the area of hostile air defenses. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. The A-10 was built for exactly this kind of mission, providing close air support to ground troops in hostile territory. But taking on an entire enemy force that had prepared defensive positions would push both her skills and her aircraft to their absolute limits. She thought about her younger brother Jake, who had joined the Navy and dreamed of becoming a SEAL someday. These weren't just military assets trapped in that canyon. They were someone's sons, brothers and fathers. As Sarah approached the target area, she could see smoke rising from several locations in the canyon below. The distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off the canyon walls, creating a chaotic symphony of warfare that chilled her to the bone. Through her aircraft's targeting system, she could make out muzzle flashes from dozens of enemy positions dug into the rocky outcroppings that surrounded the trapped SEALs. Command, this is Viper 1. I have eyes on the target. Enemy forces appear to be in prepared positions along both canyon walls. I count at least 40 separate firing positions, possibly more. The SEALs are pinned down in the canyon floor with minimal cover. Sarah's training kicked in as she began analyzing the tactical situation. The enemy had chosen their ambush site perfectly. A narrow canyon with steep walls that prevented easy escape while providing excellent cover for defenders. The SEALs were caught in what military strategists called a kill zone, where every avenue of movement was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Viper 1, you are cleared hot. Repeat, you are cleared hot. Make your attacks count. Those boys don't have much time left. Sarah took a deep breath and rolled her A-10 into a steep dive toward the canyon. The aircraft's titanium bathtub cockpit was designed to protect her from ground fire, but she knew that the enemy would throw everything they had at her once she began her attack runs. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. 381 lives depending on her skill, courage, and the deadly accuracy of her aircraft's weapon systems. As she lined up for her first strafing run, Sarah could see individual SEAL team members taking cover behind rocks and in shallow depressions. They had scraped from the hard desert floor. Many appeared to be wounded, and their return fire was becoming sporadic as ammunition ran low. Time was running out, and Sarah knew that conventional tactics wouldn't be enough to break the enemy's stranglehold on the canyon. The first bursts of anti-aircraft fire streaked past her canopy as enemy gunners tried to track her diving aircraft. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with combat, her senses becoming hyper-aware of every sight, sound, and vibration as she prepared to engage. This wasn't just another close air support mission. This was a desperate race against time to save hundreds of America's most elite warriors from certain death. She whispered a quiet prayer as her finger moved to the trigger of her cannon, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she would be remembered as the pilot who saved 381 SEALs, or as another casualty of America's longest war. The canyon wall seemed to close in around her as she committed to her attack run, fully aware that she was about to face the greatest challenge of her military career. The radio chatter from the trapped SEALs grew more desperate with each passing second, their voices tight with the strain of prolonged combat and dwindling hope. Sarah knew that failure wasn't an option. Too many lives hung in the balance, and she was their only hope for survival in this remote corner of Afghanistan, where death lurked behind every rock and in every shadow. Sarah's A-10 screamed down toward the canyon floor at nearly 400 miles per hour, the ground rushing up to meet her with terrifying speed. Her targeting computer locked onto the first cluster of enemy positions along the eastern canyon wall, where heavy machine gun fire was raking the trapped SEALs below. The distinctive sound of her Gu-8 cannon erupted like thunder, as 2-second bursts of depleted uranium rounds tore into the rocky positions. The effect was devastating and immediate. Chunks of stone and metal flew through the air as the 30mm rounds pulverized the enemy fighting positions. Several machine gun nests fell silent, but Sarah could see more muzzle flashes appearing from backup positions that had remained hidden until now. The enemy had prepared for air attacks, creating multiple layers of defensive positions that could maintain overlapping fields of fire even after taking casualties. Good hits, Viper 1. You got at least 6 positions on that pass. The voice belonged to Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the senior SEAL team leader coordinating the trapped forces from his position behind a boulder near the canyon center. But we're still taking heavy fire from the western wall. They've got us zeroed in from multiple angles. Sarah pulled her aircraft into a tight climbing turn, feeling the G-forces press her deep into her ejection seat as she prepared for another attack run. Through her canopy, she could see the scope of the enemy force arrayed against the SEALs. This wasn't a random ambush by local insurgents. This was a coordinated military operation involving hundreds of well-trained fighters with modern weapons and excellent tactical positioning. Command, this is Viper 1. I need immediate intelligence on enemy numbers and disposition. This looks like at least a battalion-sized force with prepared positions and air defense systems. Sarah spoke rapidly into her microphone while scanning the canyon walls for surface-to-air missile sites that could threaten her aircraft. Confirmed. Viper 1. Satellite intelligence shows approximately 600 enemy fighters in prepared positions throughout the canyon complex. They've been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months. The SEALs were lured into the trap by false intelligence about a high-value target meeting. The situation was even worse than Sarah had initially realized. The enemy outnumbered the trapped SEALs by more than 3-2, held superior defensive positions, and had prepared specifically for this engagement. Conventional close air support tactics would not be sufficient to break their stranglehold on the canyon. As Sarah rolled into her second attack run, targeting the western canyon wall where the heaviest enemy fire originated, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Scattered among the rocky outcroppings were what appeared to be man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles that could bring down her aircraft if the operators got a clear shot. SAM sights active, Sarah called out as she jinked her aircraft hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a heat-seeking missile that streaked past her starboard wing. The proximity alarm in her cockpit screamed warnings as her electronic countermeasures systems deployed chaff and flares to confuse any additional missiles that might be tracking her. Despite the threat, Sarah pressed home her attack, walking her cannon fire across a line of enemy positions that had been pouring devastating fire into the SEAL positions below. The 30mm rounds chewed through rock and metal with equal ease, silencing another half-dozen enemy weapons. But for every position she destroyed, it seemed like 2 more opened fire from previously concealed locations. Viper 1, this is Bravo team leader. We've got wounded who need immediate medical attention, but we can't move them under this fire. Can you suppress the northern approaches so we can consolidate our wounded? Sarah could hear the desperation in the SEAL's voice as she pulled out of her dive and assessed the tactical situation. The enemy had positioned snipers and machine gun teams to cover every possible movement within the canyon, creating interlocking fields of fire that made it nearly impossible for the SEALs to maneuver or treat their casualties effectively. Roger. Bravo team. I'm going to make a series of attacks on the northern wall. Get ready to move your wounded when I give the signal. Sarah banked her aircraft toward the northern canyon wall, where enemy snipers had been picking off any SEAL who exposed himself for more than a few seconds. The next 20 minutes became a deadly dance of attack and evasion as Sarah made pass after pass through the canyon, systematically targeting enemy positions while avoiding the growing number of surface-to-air missiles being fired at her aircraft. Her ammunition counter showed that she was burning through her supply of 30mm rounds at an alarming rate, and she knew that conventional ammunition wouldn't be enough to dislodge the enemy from their fortified positions. Command, I need authorization for Maverick missiles and cluster munitions. The enemy positions are too well fortified for cannon fire alone. Sarah's voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system as another missile streaked past her canopy, close enough that she could see the individual fins on the warhead. Negative. Viper 1. Danger close restrictions are in effect. The SEALs are too close to enemy positions for heavy ordnance. The response from command filled Sarah with frustration. She understood the safety protocols, but those same protocols were going to get 381 SEALs killed if she couldn't find a way to break the enemy's defensive advantage. As she climbed out of the canyon for another attack run, Sarah made a decision that would either save the trapped SEALs or end her career, possibly both. She switched her targeting system to manual mode and selected her remaining Maverick air-to-surface missiles, despite the danger close restrictions that prohibited their use. Command, this is Viper 1. I'm declaring a tactical emergency and assuming on-scene commander authority. Those SEALs are going to die if I don't take action now. Sarah's voice carried the weight of 3 years of combat experience and the knowledge that she was about to risk everything on a series of precision strikes that had never been attempted under such conditions. The response from command was immediate and sharp. Negative, Viper 1. You are not authorized to employ heavy ordnance in that target area. Abort your attack and return to base immediately. Sarah reached up and switched off her radio, cutting the link to command and accepting full responsibility for whatever happened next. She was alone now, flying by instinct and experience, with 381 lives depending on her ability to thread the needle between saving the SEALs and avoiding a catastrophic friendly fire incident that would haunt her for the rest of her life. With her radio silenced and command authority severed, Sarah found herself in complete tactical control of the situation for the first time since the engagement began. The weight of 381 lives pressed down on her shoulders as she lined up for what would be the most dangerous and precise series of attacks in A-10 combat history. Her aircraft's heads-up display showed multiple target locks as she prepared to engage enemy positions that were sometimes less than 50 meters from friendly forces. Master Chief. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the emergency frequency, barely audible over the sound of gunfire. Unknown aircraft, this is ground commander. We're taking casualties every minute you delay. Whatever you're planning, we trust your judgment. These boys are counting on you. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision across her weapons console, selecting her first Maverick missile and designating a target on the eastern canyon wall, where a heavy machine gun position had been decimating the exposed SEAL teams. The missile's infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of the enemy weapon, but Sarah knew that a single degree of error could send the warhead into friendly positions. All SEAL teams, this is your close air support. I need everyone to mark their positions with infrared strobes and take the best cover you can find. I'm going danger close with heavy ordnance in 30 seconds. Sarah's voice was calm and professional, but her heart hammered against her ribs as she committed to a course of action that violated every safety protocol in the Air Force manual. The first Maverick missile streaked away from her aircraft's wing pylon with a brilliant flash of rocket motor ignition. Sarah held her breath as the weapon arced down toward the canyon wall, its guidance system making tiny corrections to ensure precision impact. The explosion, when it came, was tremendous. A ball of orange flame and black smoke that seemed to shake the entire canyon. Direct hit. "The machine gun nest is gone!" Rodriguez's excited voice confirmed what Sarah's targeting system was showing her. The Maverick had struck within meters of its intended target, destroying the enemy position without causing friendly casualties. But there were dozens more positions that needed to be eliminated, and Sarah was running out of both time and ammunition. Enemy anti-aircraft fire intensified as Sarah set up for her second missile attack. The defenders had realized that she was willing to employ heavy weapons despite the proximity to friendly forces, and they were throwing everything they had at her aircraft. Tracers streaked past her canopy like deadly fireworks, and the proximity alarms in her cockpit created a constant chorus of warnings. Sarah's second Maverick targeted a cluster of mortar positions on the western wall that had been dropping rounds directly into the SEAL formations below. The missile's flight path took it between two rocky outcroppings where friendly forces were sheltering, with less than 20 meters of clearance on either side. Any deviation in the weapon's guidance system would have catastrophic results. The explosion illuminated the entire canyon as the Maverick detonated among the mortar tubes, sending secondary explosions rippling across the enemy positions as stored ammunition cooked off in the intense heat. Sarah could see through her targeting system that at least 8 enemy weapons had been silenced by the single strike. But the celebration was short-lived as new positions opened fire from backup locations. "Viper 1, we've got movement in the northern canyon. Looks like enemy reinforcements moving in to flank our positions." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Hayes, a SEAL team leader who had been coordinating the defense of the northern perimeter. Sarah could see the tactical situation deteriorating as fresh enemy forces moved to exploit gaps in the SEAL defenses. Sarah's ammunition display showed that she had expended more than half of her ordnance, but the enemy force seemed to have unlimited reserves of fighters and weapons. For every position she destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, and the SEALs were running dangerously low on ammunition after hours of sustained combat. "All teams, this is Ground Commander. We're down to less than 30 rounds per man, and medical supplies are critically low. If we don't get relief soon, we're going to have to consider breakout options." Rodriguez's transmission carried the unspoken knowledge that a breakout attempt would likely result in massive casualties among the wounded SEALs who couldn't keep up with a fighting withdrawal. Sarah made another decision that pushed her even further beyond authorized tactics. Instead of continuing with precision strikes against individual targets, she began using her remaining missiles to create avalanches and rock slides that would block enemy movement routes and limit their ability to maneuver against the trapped SEALs. Her third Maverick struck a critical support point on the eastern canyon wall, sending thousands of tons of rock cascading down onto enemy positions below. The avalanche not only destroyed multiple enemy fighting positions, but also blocked the main approach route that reinforcements had been using to strengthen the attack. "Outstanding. You just cut off their main supply line," Hayes reported as the dust cloud from the avalanche began to settle. Enemy fire from the eastern wall has dropped by at least 60%. But Sarah's tactical innovation came with a price. The rock slides and explosions had altered the canyon's topography, making it even more difficult for helicopters to attempt an extraction once the immediate threat was neutralized. She was saving the SEALs from the current enemy attack, but potentially trapping them in the canyon for an extended period. Sarah's fourth Maverick targeted what appeared to be a command post on the western wall, where she had observed radio antennas and increased activity among enemy fighters. The missile's warhead penetrated deep into a cave system before detonating, collapsing several connected chambers that had been serving as ammunition storage and communications centers. The effect on enemy coordination was immediate and dramatic. The sustained, coordinated fire that had been so devastating to the SEAL positions became sporadic and disorganized as local commanders lost contact with their higher headquarters. Individual enemy positions continued to fire, but the overwhelming tactical advantage they had maintained through superior coordination began to erode. "Enemy fire is becoming more random," Rodriguez observed. "Looks like you hit something important with that last strike. Their response times are slower, and they're not coordinating their attacks anymore." Sarah knew that she had achieved a critical tactical advantage, but her fuel gauge showed that she was approaching the point where she would need to return to base for refueling. The question was whether she had done enough damage to the enemy force to give the SEALs a fighting chance to hold their positions until reinforcements could arrive, or whether leaving them now would simply postpone their inevitable destruction. Sarah's fuel warning light blinked red on her instrument panel as she climbed out of the canyon after her latest strafing run. Mathematics didn't lie. She had perhaps 15 minutes of combat fuel remaining before she would be forced to return to base or risk running out of fuel over hostile territory. The thought of abandoning the SEALs now when they were finally gaining the upper hand made her stomach clench with anxiety. "Command, this is any station. I need immediate fuel support in Sector 7. Sarah had reluctantly re-established radio contact, knowing that her unauthorized use of heavy ordnance would result in serious disciplinary action, but hoping that her superiors would prioritize the mission over military regulations. The response was swift and cold. "Viper 1, you are ordered to return to base immediately. A formal investigation into your violation of engagement protocols will begin upon your landing." Tanker support is denied. Sarah stared at her fuel gauge in disbelief. Command was willing to let 381 SEALs die rather than provide support to a pilot who had broken regulations while trying to save them. The bureaucratic mentality that put paperwork ahead of human lives had always frustrated her, but never more than at this moment when American warriors were fighting for their lives below. "Ground Commander, this is Viper 1. I'm showing low fuel and may have to depart station soon. What's your tactical situation?" Sarah hoped that the SEALs had been able to consolidate their position and reduce their casualty rate during her attacks on enemy coordination centers. Rodriguez's response was not encouraging. "Viper 1, enemy pressure is increasing again. They've reorganized and are massing for what looks like a final assault on our positions. We're down to less than 20 rounds per man and we've got 37 wounded who can't move without assistance." Sarah's mind raced as she calculated possibilities. Returning to base would take 40 minutes minimum, assuming immediate clearance for takeoff after refueling. By that time, the SEALs would likely be overrun and killed. There had to be another option, something that didn't involve abandoning American warriors to face certain death while she flew safely back to base. "Command, this is Viper 1 requesting emergency authorization for aerial refueling. I have critical fuel state and American forces in contact require immediate air support." Sarah tried one more official request, hoping that someone in the command structure would prioritize the mission over punishment for her earlier rule violations. "Negative. Viper 1, no tanker support is authorized. Return to base immediately or face additional charges for willful disobedience of direct orders." Sarah looked down at the canyon where muzzle flashes were increasing in intensity as the enemy prepared for their final assault. She could see SEAL positions being overwhelmed one by one as ammunition ran low and the wounded were unable to maintain effective defensive fire. In 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, it would all be over. That's when she remembered something from her pre-flight briefing that morning. A KC-135 tanker aircraft had been conducting training operations in the adjacent sector, practicing aerial refueling procedures with fighter aircraft. If that tanker was still in the area, and if she could convince its crew to break regulations just as she had done, there might be a chance to save the SEALs. "Any KC-135 aircraft in Sector 6, this is Viper 1 on emergency frequency. I have 381 American warriors in imminent danger and critically low fuel state. Request immediate emergency refueling support." Sarah broadcast on the emergency frequency that all military aircraft monitored, hoping that the tanker crew would respond even though command had denied authorization. The response came from a voice she didn't recognize, speaking with the calm professionalism of a veteran aircrew member. "Viper 1, this is Texaco 77. We copy your emergency transmission. We're currently 15 minutes from your position. Can you maintain station that long?" Sarah checked her fuel gauge again and made some quick calculations. "Texaco 77, I can stretch it to maybe 12 minutes if I reduce power and climb to optimize fuel consumption. After that, I'll be on fumes. Roger, Viper 1, we're coming to you at maximum speed. Texaco 77 is declaring a flight safety emergency to justify breaking from our assigned mission. Hope those boys down there are worth our careers." Sarah felt tears of gratitude sting her eyes as she realized that she wasn't the only military aviator willing to risk everything to save fellow Americans. "Texaco 77, I guarantee you those SEALs are worth it. I'm climbing to Angels 20 for rendezvous." As Sarah climbed toward the rendezvous altitude, she could hear the radio chatter from the canyon growing more desperate. The enemy final assault had begun, and SEAL positions were reporting being overrun one by one. Master Chief Rodriguez's voice carried the strain of a leader watching his men die around him. All stations, this is Ground Commander. We are being overrun from multiple directions. If anyone can provide immediate fire support, we need it now. We're down to our last few rounds and cannot hold much longer. Sarah pushed her throttles forward despite her fuel concerns, trading precious fuel for speed as she dove back toward the canyon. She had perhaps 3 minutes of combat fuel remaining, enough for 1 or 2 strafing passes before her engines would start flaming out from fuel starvation. Ground Commander, this is Viper 1. I'm making one final attack run before fuel exhaustion. Mark your positions and keep your heads down. Sarah's voice was steady despite the knowledge that she was about to attempt something that no A-10 pilot had ever tried before, the maximum duration. Strafing run that would expend every remaining round in her cannon while flying on vapors. Sarah lined up her aircraft with the main axis of the canyon and began the longest, most sustained strafing run in A-10 combat history. Her GAU-8 cannon roared continuously as she walked the fire across every visible enemy position, spending the last of her 30mm ammunition in a desperate attempt to buy the SEALs enough time for the tanker aircraft to reach their position. The enemy response was immediate and intense, with every remaining anti-aircraft weapon in the canyon firing at her low-flying aircraft. Tracers filled the air around her canopy like deadly confetti, and Sarah felt the impact of small arms rounds hitting her aircraft's armored hull. The A-10's legendary toughness was being tested to its absolute limits as she pressed home her attack despite catastrophic fuel shortage and intense enemy fire. Her fuel warning alarm changed from an intermittent beep to a continuous tone as her first engine began losing power from fuel starvation. Sarah fought to control her aircraft as asymmetric thrust tried to roll her into the canyon wall, while simultaneously trying to complete her strafing run before total engine failure forced her to eject into hostile territory. Sarah's second engine began sputtering as the last drops of fuel were consumed from her tanks, but she managed to complete her strafing run and pull her crippled aircraft into a shallow climb away from the canyon walls. The A-10's twin engines were designed to operate independently, allowing the aircraft to fly on a single engine if necessary, but flying on fumes with battle damage was pushing the legendary Warthog beyond its design limits. Texaco 77. This is Viper 1. I'm showing dual-engine flameout imminent. Where are you? Sarah's voice remained calm despite the fact that she was seconds away from becoming a glider, with the aerodynamic properties of a flying brick. Below her, the canyon erupted in cheers as the SEALs realized that her final attack run had broken the enemy assault and bought them precious time to reorganize their defenses. Viper 1. Texaco 77 has you in sight at your 2 o'clock position. We're setting up for emergency refueling procedures. Can you maintain altitude for 90 seconds? Sarah looked at her instrument panel, where multiple warning lights were flashing red and her engine temperatures were climbing rapidly. Both turbofan engines were running on vapors and would flame out completely within the next minute. Negative Texaco 77, I'm going to start losing altitude in about 30 seconds. We need to make this happen fast. What followed was the most dangerous aerial refueling attempt in military aviation history. Normally, aerial refueling required stable flight conditions and precise positioning between the tanker and receiver aircraft. But Sarah's A-10 was rapidly becoming unflyable as her engines lost power, while the KC-135 tanker crew was attempting to perform a procedure they had only practiced under ideal conditions. Viper 1, you're drifting low and to the left. Bring your nose up and move right to align with the boom. The voice of the KC-135's boom operator was tight with concentration as he maneuvered the refueling boom toward Sarah's aircraft while both planes flew through turbulent air at over 300 miles per hour. Sarah's first engine flamed out completely just as the refueling boom made contact with her aircraft's fuel receptacle. The sudden loss of power caused her A-10 to roll violently to the left, nearly severing the fuel connection before she could regain control. Her remaining engine was now operating at barely 10% power, not enough to maintain level flight much longer. Contact. We have fuel flow. The boom operator's excited voice was the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard, as precious jet fuel began flowing into her empty tanks. But the celebration was premature. Maintaining the fuel connection while flying a damaged aircraft on minimal power required every ounce of Sarah's skill and experience. Viper 1, Ground Commander. The enemy is regrouping for another assault. We need air support in approximately 10 minutes or we're going to be overrun. Again. Rodriguez's voice carried the strain of a leader who had watched his ammunition supplies dwindle to almost nothing. During the brief respite Sarah's attack had provided, Sarah gritted her teeth as she fought to maintain position behind the tanker. While fuel flowed into her aircraft, she needed at least 5 more minutes of fuel transfer to have enough for another combat mission, but the SEALs were reporting enemy movement that suggested they didn't have 5 minutes to spare. Texaco 77, I need to disconnect now and engage enemy forces. Thanks for the fuel. You probably saved 381 American lives today. Sarah began the disconnection procedure even though her tanks were only partially filled, knowing that partial fuel was better than no fuel when American warriors were fighting for their lives. Roger, Viper 1. Good hunting, and may God go with you. The tanker crew's professionalism couldn't hide the emotion in the boom operator's voice as he retracted the fuel boom and watched Sarah's A-10 disappear back toward the canyon where the sound of gunfire was once again intensifying. Sarah's engines roared, back to full power as she dove toward the canyon, her partially refilled fuel tanks giving her perhaps 20 minutes of combat operations. Through her targeting system, she could see that the enemy had indeed reorganized and was preparing for another coordinated assault on the SEAL positions. Fresh fighters were moving into positions that she had cleared during her earlier attacks, and new heavy weapons were being brought forward to support the assault. All SEAL teams, this is Viper 1 back on station. I have limited fuel and ordnance, so we need to make every shot count. What are your priority targets? Sarah's tactical display showed that she had expended all of her missiles during the earlier engagement, leaving her with only her 30mm cannon and whatever ammunition had survived her previous strafing runs. Viper 1, we've got heavy machine gun positions setting up on the eastern wall at coordinates I'm transmitting now. They have clear fields of fire across our entire defensive perimeter. If they get those guns operational, we won't be able to move at all. Lieutenant Commander Hayes's voice was tight with urgency as enemy tracers began reaching out toward SEAL positions that had briefly enjoyed relative safety. Sarah rolled into another attack dive, her cannon erupting in short, precise bursts that conserved ammunition while maintaining maximum effectiveness. Her first attack run destroyed 2 heavy machine gun positions and their crews, but she could see more weapons being moved into backup positions that suggested the enemy had anticipated her return. Good hits, Viper 1. Enemy fire from the eastern positions is suppressed, but we're seeing movement on the western wall that looks like mortar teams setting up for indirect fire. Support. Rodriguez's situation reports were becoming more urgent as the tactical situation deteriorated despite Sarah's renewed air support. Sarah's second attack run targeted the mortar positions, walking her cannon fire across suspected setup locations and forcing the enemy crews to abandon their weapons or be destroyed. But each attack run consumed precious fuel and ammunition that she couldn't afford to waste, and the enemy seemed to have unlimited reserves of fighters and equipment. Viper 1, this is Ground Commander. We're receiving reports from forward observers that enemy reinforcements are moving through the northern approaches. Looks like at least 200 additional fighters with heavy weapons and possibly vehicle support. The tactical situation was spiraling beyond Sarah's ability to control from the air. Even with her renewed fuel supply, she couldn't be everywhere at once, and the enemy's numerical superiority was beginning to tell as they exploited every gap in her coverage to advance. Against the exhausted SEAL teams, Sarah made a decision that would either end the engagement decisively or result in her own death. She was going to attempt the most dangerous close air support tactic in military aviation by flying directly through the canyon at low altitude, engaging targets on both walls simultaneously while maintaining enough speed to avoid ground fire. Sarah descended to an altitude of less than 100 feet above the canyon floor, flying directly between the enemy positions on both walls while her GAU-8 cannon switched targets rapidly from left to right. The tactic was suicidal by conventional standards. Flying so low made her aircraft vulnerable to every small arms weapon in the canyon, but it also allowed her to engage multiple targets simultaneously while denying the enemy time to track her aircraft. Effectively, the sound of her cannon echoed off the canyon walls like thunder as she flew the most dangerous close air support mission ever attempted. Enemy tracers filled the air around her aircraft like deadly fireworks, and Sarah felt multiple impacts as bullets struck her armored cockpit and fuselage. The A-10's legendary durability was being tested to its absolute limits as she pressed through a wall of gunfire that would have destroyed any other aircraft. Incredible. She's flying right through the middle of everything, Hayes shouted over the radio as SEALs throughout the canyon watched in amazement while Sarah's aircraft carved a path of destruction through enemy positions that had seemed untouchable moments before. Sarah's canyon run lasted less than 60 seconds, but in that time she destroyed more than 20 enemy positions and completely disrupted the coordinated assault that had been building against the SEAL perimeter. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently just minutes before were now seeking cover from an aircraft that seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost, striking from unexpected angles before vanishing into the maze of canyon walls. All SEAL teams, this is Ground Commander. Enemy assault has been broken. Repeat, the enemy assault has been broken. They're pulling back to defensive positions and we're no longer receiving incoming fire. Rodriguez's voice carried a note of disbelief as the sustained gunfire that had characterized the engagement for hours suddenly diminished to sporadic shots. But Sarah's fuel gauge showed that her daring tactics had consumed fuel at an alarming rate. She had perhaps 5 minutes of flight time remaining before she would once again face the choice between ejecting over hostile territory or attempting a dead-stick landing with battle damage. The canyon run had saved the SEALs from immediate destruction, but it had used up her remaining fuel reserves in the process. Command, this is Viper 1. Mission accomplished. The SEAL teams are no longer in immediate danger, but I'm showing critical fuel state and multiple battle damage indicators. Requesting emergency landing clearance and medical support for 381 SEALs in Sector 7. The response from command was immediate, but cold. Viper 1, you are directed to eject immediately and await pickup. Your aircraft is considered a loss due to battle damage and unauthorized mission extension. A formal court-martial will convene upon your return. Sarah looked down at the canyon where SEAL teams were already beginning to move their wounded to consolidation points now that enemy fire had been suppressed. These men were alive because she had been willing to risk everything, and command was ordering her to abandon a flyable aircraft rather than attempt a landing that might save both her life and a multi-million-dollar military asset. Negative, command. I'm bringing this bird home. Sarah switched off her radio one final time and turned her battered A-10 toward the nearest friendly airfield, knowing that she was adding insubordination to the growing list of charges that would end her military career. The flight back to base became a test of both pilot skill and aircraft engineering as Sarah nursed her damaged A-10 through increasingly severe mechanical problems. Her hydraulic systems were failing, her electrical systems were intermittent, and her fuel quantity was dropping towards zero with each passing minute. But the twin engines continued to run, and the flight controls still responded to her inputs despite damage that would have grounded the aircraft under normal circumstances. Any station, this is Viper 1 declaring emergency. I have battle damage and critical fuel approaching friendly airfield. Request immediate clearance for emergency landing. Sarah broadcast on the emergency frequency as the runway came into view ahead of her, knowing that she would have only one chance to get her aircraft safely on the ground. The response came from the control tower, where controllers had been monitoring her situation despite command's orders to treat her as a rogue pilot. Viper 1, you are cleared for emergency landing runway 09. Fire and rescue equipment is standing by. Good luck. Sarah's approach was barely controlled as her damaged aircraft fought her inputs and her fuel quantity indicator showed empty tanks. Her engines were running on fumes and would flame out at any moment. But she managed to line up with the runway center line as her landing gear extended, with grinding sounds that indicated mechanical damage. The landing was hard but successful, with Sarah's A-10 touching down on the runway and rolling to a stop just as both engines flamed out from fuel exhaustion. Emergency crews surrounded her aircraft within seconds, but Sarah was already climbing out of her cockpit with a smile on her face, despite knowing that her military career was effectively over. 3 hours later, as Sarah sat in a holding cell awaiting the beginning of formal disciplinary proceedings, Master Chief Rodriguez arrived at the base with a delegation of the SEAL team leaders she had saved. Their testimony about her actions in the canyon, combined with the tactical radio recordings that documented her life-saving decisions, would eventually lead to the charges being dropped and Sarah receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism. But more importantly, 3-81. American Special Operations warriors returned home to their families because one Air Force pilot had been willing to risk everything to carve a path to freedom through an impossible tactical situation. The Canyon engagement would be studied in military academies for decades as an example of individual courage, overcoming overwhelming odds. And Sarah Mitchell would forever be remembered as the pilot who proved that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to do what's right. Years later, when Sarah had risen to the rank of colonel and was training the next generation of A-10 pilots, she would tell them that the most important lesson she had learned in Afghanistan wasn't about tactics or technology. It was about the sacred trust between military, aviators, and the ground forces who depend on them for survival. That trust, she would say, is worth any personal sacrifice and should never be broken, regardless of regulations or career consequences.